Hi, my name is Brandon Northrop, and welcome to Percipio alongside Yassine Al-Sheikh from Texas. Say hi.
Hey yo.
Giovanni Barrios from Iowa. Say hi.
Already did. Hi.
And Landon Eves from Oregon. Say hi.
Hi.
On this episode, we will be discussing standardized testing and its effect on students. And to begin, I will ask you all a question. How has standardized testing affected your learning experience and the experiences of people around you? Yassine, if you would like to start off.
All right. So, how has standardized testing affected me and those around me?
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely say for me and my friends specifically, because we're in that, AP, dual credit, top 10% type of range for the people in that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Me personally, I don't care as much anymore. I definitely got test anxiety and nerve-wracking and anxiety attacks and all that type of stuff early on in my high school career.
Mm-hmm.
But I've lost that kind of care for academic success, partly probably due to that. But for my friends who still care, they get anxiety attacks, and I definitely think it detriments their health over time, and it gets them too tunnel visioned into what probably doesn't really matter in the end, because a test score is just a test score. It doesn't measure your worth or your success necessarily, and they definitely think that it does. So for us, I would definitely say it's a negative effect down here in Texas.
I see. Thank you. Gio, would you like to add on to that?
Personally, I'm very high achieving academically, but I do feel that for my peers, it's a very stressing time period, or they just genuinely do not care about the standardized testing at all because they feel that's not going to reflect what they are anyway, so they don't give it their all, and thus standardized testing as a whole for Iowa, in my opinion, is flawed.
Thank you. Landon, do you have anything to say?
Not really. I haven't really hit that exact sort of grade range where I've been hit with enough standardized testing to have that sort of experience with it, especially, with me and the people around me. Sorry.
I see. Thank you. All right. So how do you guys feel about test anxiety? I know you said that you and your friends started developing test anxiety. When did that happen?
I would definitely say that it didn't matter as much in freshman year because, freshmen have that attitude about them. They don't really care about anything yet. They're not thinking about college or getting out of their city, if they're especially in a smaller one. But during sophomore year, you start getting the teachers and the counselor talking to you about AP exams and prepping for college, and especially for someone who's in a southern area, especially in a smaller city. There's that attitude among a lot of students that you want to get out of there. And the best way to do that is to go to a good college out of state. And you can't do that unless you get high test scores. So people start to convolute and combine self-worth and your ability to improve with test scores. And that's where test anxiety comes into play, especially for people when they start getting their sophomore year.
I see. Thank you. Gio, do you have more to add?
Personally, in Iowa, it's the case that standardized testing begins very young. I remember doing it both in my elementary school years and my middle school years, as well as now my high school years. And I can say that even back then, I did begin to have test anxiety because I did feel that if I did not do well in that test, that it would negatively impact my future. And I feel like a lot of people came to that realization as well. It wasn't just solely me that felt that. So I do feel that it does negatively impact our psyche as a whole.
I see. Thank you. So Landon, what have your experiences been with test anxiety?
Test anxiety. Well, in my community, there's a lot of general apathy. There's a lot of, as for anxiety, people don't care as much. And I know that doesn't relate, but a lot of people just don't think that they have a future out here.
I see. Thank you. So now I'd like to move on to study habits and wondering if perhaps that might be a cause of test anxiety. You've seen how have your study habits impacted the way you deal with tests?
Uh, I'm a first say how it's affected me, and then I'm gonna use my friend Jesus as an example. But for
Okay.
me, I definitely slack off a lot, especially in classes that don't interest me, which I'm sure a lot of people relate to. Particularly in math, if I don't study for a test, I will get anxiety, even if I don't necessarily care about the class, because I still want to go to a good college. I still want to be able to succeed. So I think at times that mechanism turns back on, and I tell myself if I don't get a good score on this test, especially if it's a midterm or a final, that my prospects will go down dramatically. So
even the act of studying can cause you stress.
yeah, certainly, I would say so, and that really goes into how my friend Jesus does things, because he studies maybe average 6 hours a night as soon as he gets home till 11 o'clock at night.
Oh wow.
Non-stop, because he's from a foreign family. He came here when he was a baby, and he wants to go to MIT. So he's on that clockwork every day, and he's constantly stressed all the time, even when studying. So I would say that I think that's that attitude, that want for that high score, even when studying, that develops that anxiety.
Thank you. So Gio, what about your study habits? How have they impacted testing?
Personally, if we're talking testing in general, I tend to kind of underestimate tests that really do hold more of an importance than I give them credit for. And as a result of that, I feel that more often than not, I find myself staying up late, studying, cramming last minute. It is partly because I am prone to procrastinating, as I'm sure a lot of people which will hear the podcast can relate to. But at the same time, it is also the factor that your future does rely in to some degree on that test, even no matter how small it is. And especially for standardized testing, well, I can't study as much for those exams since the majority of the questions are either vague, especially for Iowa assessments. If you've ever heard of that standardized exam, Brandon, but like for testing in schools and like standardized testing, which is used more broadly, like the SAT and the ACT, then I definitely do end up studying a lot more and straining myself, putting the test score over my own well-being at times.
Mm-hmm. So going back on that to the Iowa standardized testing, you said, so you believe that it does not have an accurate reflection of what you know as a student?
I would say it doesn't, because of the fact that the questions, they do not necessarily reflect the strengths of any one particular student. They're very broad questions. Some are very simplistic, others are way too advanced for some students. And while I feel that it does to some degree gauge a student's ability, because of that stress, I don't feel that it accurately reflects that student's ability in that environment, in the standard, in the topic that the standardized test is trying to target. For example, we have like social studies, we have a mathematics section, we have a science section, and this happens throughout an entire week, where you'll go in the morning, standardized test with your homeroom, and then go on with the rest of your school day. And so you have to worry about not only your school day, but also the standardized test right in the morning. So I don't feel that it accurately reflects a lot of the students' strengths at all, especially because of the apathy that Landon's mentioned as well.
Thank you. And so, Landon, how have study habits affected you with standardized testing? Do you believe that you study well, that you study poorly?
I hate to say it, but I'm one of those people, and I rarely have to study. And but when I do, I usually study for stuff that doesn't matter. But I can say that there's a lot of anxiety among the friends that do care. Yeah, just for general studying, and building up on what Gio said earlier, I think it was about Yes, it was about questions being either too simple or too broad. There's in standardized testing, what the little bit that I've experienced, I've noticed that in Oregon there's a lot of I'm an advanced math student right now. Okay, so there's a lot of content that I don't understand, even though the tests are supposed to be at my level. And then I've noticed that there's a lot of stuff that's extremely simple, stuff that I've learned years ago, and just doesn't doesn't matter, I guess.
Mhm. Wow. So you're also saying that these tests do not reflect well on the classes as well as what you might know as a student.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So how has standardized testing affect you guys as students? Do you feel like it's helped you with concepts? Do you feel like it's harmed your ability to understand concepts? Eugene, why don't you start?
In some respects, I would definitely say that it's helped, especially with like formulaic concepts like math. There is some merit to, I think, standardized testing in fields like math and science because it's more objective. Math is a logical science. You either get the right answer or you don't. So that helps with the concepts, but with stuff like history, or if we're talking about health sciences or something like that, it's more effective if you have kind of a verbal situation. Because I know like oral exams are a thing, and we don't really do that here, but I feel like that would be more effective. I don't know.
So you're saying that for some classes, perhaps a more open discussion debate would be more preferable than standardized testing?
Yeah, definitely. I think so.
Nice. Could you perhaps give an example of a class that might do better with discussion and debate?
I would think definitely histories, like world history, or even like stuff like world geography, where you learn about cultural diffusion and the blending and all that stuff. I think if you were to have like a 10-minute oral exam or 5-minute where you discuss with each student to make sure they get the concept, because I know that there's some quote out there that if you can't explain it verbally, then you don't really understand it. I think that's true to an extent. So with stuff like that, I think an oral exam would be more effective.
I see. So, Gio, how has standardized testing affect you and your abilities as a student?
If we're gauging standardized testing within courses like AP courses, which are much more rigid about their timelines, then I'd say it definitely negatively impacts my performance as a student. And the reason for that is because every single day that you're there, you're not like preparing to actually know the stuff. You're more worried about being prepared for the AP exam and whether or not you're going to know it on the AP exam date. And having taken 5 AP exams and completed 5 AP courses and
Wow.
taken 4 this year, I can say that that really does take a strain on you, especially when you're so when your teachers are on such a tight timetable that they have to get through one unit after another unit after another unit, and they have to be done by this time, or else that's it. That's over. It really skips over some students' ability to learn concepts and actually understand them.
So you're saying it negatively impacts not just the students, but also the teacher.
Oh yes, definitely. I know my teacher for AP US history right now. Her name is Doc Jones. She's a wonderful teacher. But the thing is, she'll very much like to bring in the aspect of debate and discussion, which Yasin was referring to. But the reason why she can't is simply because of the timetable that they're presented, which is, again, such a tight timetable. They have to adhere to it or risk having their students unprepared. And then if they don't get their students a certain number of passing scores, then they could risk having funding for the AP for courses slashed in their district, and it's all just it's all just very frustrating, but at the same time understandable given the system that we've established.
I see. Thank you. And I will turn on to that topic in just a second. But Landon, I want to get your opinion on this first. So, how has standardized testing affect you as a student?
As a student, I think definitely negatively, and that's for a few different reasons. But I think a really big part of it is like standardized tests only have certain things on it, right? So teachers they'll only teach two standardized test standards rather than actually giving students the full broad education that they need. And I think that's just like I could have learned so much more from so many different classes if I wasn't being taught specifically to the standards of like, just general standardized tests.
So you're saying it discourages actual discussion in classes rather in favor of just teaching to tests?
Yeah.
Okay. So now, taking this, I will now turn on to you guys to suggest how could we improve the current system of testing? Is there a better alternative for some classes? Does this system work well for some? You started onto this topic during the last question, so I'll let you start.
Yeah, so I've seen some proposals for alternatives to standardized testing, and oral exams are definitely one of those things. And I think, and I'm not a college student, at least not yet, so I think oral exams are a thing in college. I've heard some people talk about it like that.
Exams are definitely a thing in college.
Like oral ones, like where you have to discuss?
On occasion, but it's definitely not the standard.
Okay, so, but then another thing I've seen, and I don't really know if it necessarily makes it any better, but I know that some organizations do this where they pick out certain members of the testing group or like of the student body who are deemed representative of the entire body. So like, your average Joe type of person, and have them take a test. People who don't necessarily get testing anxiety, have them take the test and see where they are. And it would have to be a large enough pool to see how it indicates the rest of the body, but that seems less effective to me than another one where you assess where someone is at the beginning of the year based on like a test at the beginning, and then a similar test at the end of the year. Basically, stealth assessing how they improve throughout the year rather than one giant test that has a high stakes.
Okay.
That seems more effective.
I like that. Do you have any examples of that test in action?
Yeah. So, I know that NPR has talked about it before. They have some schools that do it in, I believe, like Northern California, and they call it stealth assessment, where you basically do where you look at the test scores throughout the year, like on a regular chapter test, and see if they're progressing and if they have any regression, and then you can look back and see why. And if they progressed enough by the end of the year, then you would deem them good enough to go into the next year. I don't know if that has a rigid enough system or if there's a good enough like numerical standpoint for that, but it definitely seems more preferable because it allows the teacher more leeway to teach, I think.
I like that system. I think that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Gio, now I'll turn to you. Do you have any ideas for an improvement on the system, or perhaps even a replacement entirely?
See, the thing with that is that it is, again, very difficult. I believe that standardized testing, to some extent, is very effective in certain programs like STEM oriented courses, which are objective, as Yasin said. But at the same time, there is a lot of standardized tests, which take these open-ended topics and sort of put them in a context where it's very rigid and rubric based. For example, I know that the AP psychology exam, I believe it's like 2 years back, there was one question which had you define and apply a term, and on the rubric, it only had one of the ways that you could apply the term, whereas in reality, you could apply the term in two different ways. And
Okay.
this created a significant amount of students who lost points on that portion of the exam purely because of the rubric, not because of the actual skill that they demonstrated. And I feel like exams such as like psychology, such as history, as Yasin mentioned, politics, the political science, international relations, those are things that are much less objective and rigid, and which we shouldn't be applying a standardized exams to the extent that we are. I for one, am also a believer in personalized exams where we're targeting students' weaknesses as opposed to just having a static exam for everybody. But again,
Okay.
that is a lot of budget, that is a lot of effort, and that would be a lot of leeway given to teachers, which I don't believe that our current system trusts yet.
Mhm.
But that's my opinion.
Thank you. So, Landon, how about you? Do you have any ideas on how to improve or replace the current system of standardized testing?
No, not personally. I see the problem definitely, but I just don't know enough about possible solutions just to make an attempt about that.
I see. So it definitely is a complicated subject. But Gio, you brought up the potential cost of a more personalized testing of students' strengths and weaknesses. But what does the current standardized testing cost anyway?
Ooh.
I have that somewhere.
Oh,
Let me see. Standardized testing. This is up as of 2012, so it's outdated, but I imagine the price has gone up. Standardized testing costs each state an average of $1.7 billion a year.
$1.7 billion. That's a lot of money for what seems to be a rather inefficient system.
Yeah, it's a quarter of 1% of total K through 12 spending in the United States as a whole.
Well, I guess in that perspective, it's not that much, but perhaps with more funding and a different system, we could see a solution that works better for students and teachers.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with me today. This has been Percipio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brandon.
Hey, thanks, man.